Kaleo came here in 1999. Perfect timing for someone who would become one of the emerging leaders in the Polynesian Voyaging Society. Back in 1996, Kupuna, Pinky and Laura Thompson, and Kenny Brown were leaders in the Voyaging Society, and also Kenny Brown was head of the Queen's Health System at that time. They formed a partnership and called it Mālama Hawaii, taking care of Hawaii, protecting Hawaii, caring for Hawaii. The partnership was formed to restore Native Hawaiian health by reviving the culture and protecting the ʻāina. It culminated in the amazing voyage to Rapa Nui, when Nainoa navigated over 1,000 miles in an area where the prevailing winds were against him to Rapa Nui, this remote, isolated, tiny island at the far southeastern end of the Polynesian Triangle. That was one of the most extraordinary, amazing voyages ever for Hōkūleʻa. Kenny Brown was a great-grandson of John Papa'i, who was a member of the court of Kamehameha III. He was a writer and historian. And when he was state senator in 1973, he spoke about the importance of Mālama. He saw it as a key Hawaiian value. He talked about how it should be in all aspects of life in Hawaii, from environmental protection, our relationship to the land, and also to all kinds of relationships, social and business and everything else. In 1996, in alignment with the vision of Kenny Brown and Pinky and Laura Thompson, Kapiolani Community College started a program called Mālama Hawaii. And I see one of our teachers here, Ipalani, who was the Hawaiian language teacher in that program, and Kaleo's first, was he your first Hawaiian language teacher, or at the college, yeah? It was like a 2-year degree program where we tried to infuse Hawaiian values, culture, language, pedagogy into all the courses in the program. Hard to believe that was 2 decades ago already. Kaleo was in one of the first cohorts, a Kaiser High School graduate. He earned an AA degree here, and then he went on to UH Manoa, where he got a BA in Hawaiian language and Hawaiian studies. Today he works in environmental conservation, and he speaks and writes in Hawaiian. And if you've seen some of the Hōkūleʻa reports online, you can read some of his stuff in Hawaiian and also see him speaking on video in Hawaiian. His work for sustainable agriculture in Kailua is exemplary of this whole value of Mālama Hawaii. So in a way, he carried on what we tried to establish in 1996, and he's still doing it 2 decades later. Now serving as an apprentice navigator for Mālama Honua, the worldwide voyage of Hōkūleʻa. Kaleo, with co-navigator Bruce Blankenfeld, navigated the canoe across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa to Brazil, one of the longest open ocean voyages for the canoe ever. Along the way, they found 2 tiny little islands in the middle of nowhere, Ascension and St. Helena. Kaleo represents the next generation of voyagers, the voyagers that Nainoa is training to carry on for us old guys. And talking about old guys, I'm an old guy, but I see Gordon Pianaya here with the white hair. He was my first captain on Hōkūleʻa when we sailed at the start of the 1992 voyage. And that was one of my first voyages on Hōkūleʻa across the Molokai Channel with 35-knot winds going, and Gordon was there, and Billy Richards and John Cruz, Great crew, love those guys. And so he's here tonight with me to pass on the canoe and the legacy to Kaleo, who will be talking to you soon. It's a pleasure to introduce someone who was once a student at KCC and is now an accomplished enough to be a teacher. He has led crew training sessions for the Worldwide Voyage, and just last year I was in one of his classes, three of his classes. Actually, he ran a whole series of training programs for the new crew coming up, and I was amazed at how much knowledge he has acquired of the language and the culture, and very impressed. So please help me welcome him to the podium where he's going to talk about his experiences, hopefully, crossing the Atlantic, the first ever Atlantic crossing of our beloved canoe, Hōkūleʻa. Thank you.
Honua, Hōkūleʻa, ka hoʻoku I o Hōkūleʻa. Liu liu malana I ka huakai, ina ka hoa wa'alono ka hea he aloha. Velina aloha e. Aloha mai kākou. O iho no Kaleomanuiwa Wong, he wahi mamo ke ia no ko'ola poko, hana ia wau I ke awawo kalama, pukaku wau ke kula ki iki o Kaiser, polole kana mea hele mai lai ina I ke wahi kula, puka kula me ka Malalo o ke kuma Dennis kawa harara, malalo hoi o ke kuma o lelo Hawaiʻi o Iwalani, ka kuma o lelo Hawaiʻi mua ma ke kula nui. Before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that I don't give speeches that often. I actually rather much be on the canoe crossing oceans than to be in front of a class, and especially being videotaped and in front of many of my kumu here today. The mele that we began with was a mele that was written specifically for this worldwide voyage, to introduce ourselves wherever we go as part of the crew, as part of Hōkūleʻa. It was kind of a poetic way of saying we're from Hawaiʻi. We're from the place where the Hōkūleʻa, our zenith star, is at its highest place in the sky, and that's who we are. So here talking about Hōkūleʻa, I'll introduce myself and identify myself as a crew member on that va'a. With us tonight, lots of crew members, so if you guys have questions, hold it to the end and I'll direct it to them. I'll direct it to them, so lots of good people. Uncle Gordon, as Dennis was saying, Desko Harada, one of the original guys on Hōkūleʻa. I believe he was a captain in 1980 to Tahiti and back. Kapiolani here, Kumu, HTC, and at UH, teaching voyaging. You can ask her lots of questions. Dennis Harada, of course, as he was saying, he was a crew member of Hōkūleʻa as well. Yeah, just honored to be here, come back to KCC and talk to you guys and some of my teachers who have been here. Mahalo for coming. My talk today is about Hōkūleʻa and Aloha ʻāina, but before I get into Hōkūleʻa and our last leg, just wanted to touch on Aloha ʻāina and the many things it means, but what I'm defining it as, so that we come from a similar perspective when I then talk about Hōkūleʻa. It's working. So what is Aloha ʻāina? We all know that Aloha ʻāina literally means to love the land. We know that anything we do to love the land is Aloha ʻāina. Going out and picking up rubbish at the beach, doing beach cleanups, that's Aloha ʻāina. But tonight, what we're talking about, Aloha ʻāina, is really a deeper meaning of what Aloha ʻāina is. To talk about Aloha ʻāina and to understand what Aloha ʻāina really is, to talk about ourselves and to understand ourselves and who we are. There's the Olelo no Eo, Hanau ka ʻāina, Hanau ke li'i, Hanau ke kanaka. Born was the land, born was the chiefs, born was the people. With this is the story of Papa and Wakea and the creation of our islands and the creation of our people. Papa and Wakea, if you've never heard of them, one of the two main gods who are credited with giving birth to the land of Hawaiʻi. They also had a daughter, Hōkūleʻa. Wakea and Hōkūleʻa had their first child, but it was a premature stillborn, buried it in the land. From there up came the kalo. Their next pregnancy did yield a human. That was Haloa, the second after Haloa Nakalau Kapalili, to which we all descend. So as Hawaiians, and understanding our genealogies of where we come from really is putting us in a familial relationship with where we stand and the plant, our ancestor that feeds us. But Aloha ʻāina, a lot of times when you see it in newspapers, it was written about the poʻe Aloha ʻāina, where the people who were steadfast in their dedication for the love of this land, for fighting for what was perceived to be pono, the right thing for this land, for the lahui, for the Hawaiian government. The poʻe Aloha ʻāina were the people who supported Lili'u Kalani at the time of the overthrow instead of the provisional government. Those were the poʻe Aloha ʻāina. And most of the time, if we were to do a search in Nupepa, we'd come up with examples of that. But it wasn't just written in a newspaper and in multiple newspapers, but it was the name of a whole newspaper was called Kealoha ʻāina. It was edited by Joseph Navahi, who later became a founding member of the Hui Aloha ʻāina. The Hui Aloha ʻāina, if you guys haven't heard of them, they're the guys who put together, who came up, who drafted, who compiled, and who delivered the Ku'e petitions that was petitioning the annexation of Hawaiʻi to be a part of the U.S. You can see there's a guy in the middle with all of his umi on his face. The guy on his right is Joseph Navahi, the editor of the Kealoha ʻāina. The guy on his left in the very front row is John Mahi'ai Kaneakua, the great-grandfather of my father, who's here tonight. My great-great-grandfather, part of the Hui Aloha ʻāina. And everybody today, every Hawaiian today can trace their ancestry, they can trace their kupuna and find them that they've signed the Ku'e petitions, because I think it's about 38,000 out of the 40,000 signed the petitions, if I'm not mistaken. And not to say that those 2,000 didn't support it, but maybe they're far off somewhere in some valley, and the only way to get there is by foot or maybe by va'a somewhere on Molokai or Waimanu or places like that, who knows. An example of the Ku'e petitions. Next to this is one of the former presidents of the Hui Aloha ʻāina talking about Aloha ʻāina. And he has this quote, "Mai maka'u, e kupa'a me ke aloha i ka ʻāina, a e loka hi maka mana'o. E ku e loa aku i ka ho'ohui ia o Hawaiʻi me Amelika, a hiki i ke aloha ʻāina hope loa." So from here, it's talking about Aloha ʻāina is not just an action, but it's the noun, or it's the people who Aloha ʻāina, a hiki i ke aloha ʻāina hope loa. And as we know today, we still have po'e Aloha ʻāina who are still fighting for the same things and continue on and will continue on forever. But this Aloha ʻāina that we're talking about isn't just relegated. It's not just to people who are active in the political scene, who are there to fight and get arrested in the streets for blockades or whatever. For Aloha ʻāina is also planting kalo. As Kalekoa, he was one of the speakers here on the last time. One of the things he always says is one of the most radical things you can do as a Hawaiian is plant kalo. In Kalekoa, that's what he says. And it's true. And this is Aloha ʻāina. But Aloha ʻāina is many things. Aloha ʻāina is dancing hula. Aloha ʻāina is playing Hawaiian music. Aloha ʻāina is teaching our keiki. Aloha ʻāina, o kalelo Hawaii, o ke aloha ʻāina no ia. Speaking our language is aloha ʻāina. And aloha ʻāina is also voyaging as we do with our ancestors the way they did it. And all of these things could have their own presentation about aloha ʻāina. Tonight, we're going with this route, Hōkūleʻa, and we'll talk about it there. But before we get into that, we'll begin with the mo'oku auhau of Hōkūleʻa, who she is, and the circumstances she was born into and born out of that created who she is. Then we'll get into the voyage that we as a Lahui are on. We'll get there. Another one of our mo'olelo that we have is that we came here from the south, somewhere from Kahiki, right? We all know that. That's one of our mo'olelo. According to anthropologists, archaeologists, linguists, that peoples that came into the Pacific started sailing 7,000 years ago. According to our own genealogies, we've been in Hawaii for 2,000 years. If we just think about, this time frame and when Western oceanic explorations began, like in the 1500s, by that time, oceanic Pacific people has already been sailing 5,000 years. They have this Stone Age culture, but they're able, Stone Age culture, sail 5,000 years, over 5,000 years. Been in Hawaii maybe 1,500 years before they even started sailing. With this kind of sailing, with this navigation, with our va'a that we were able to create, we went off and settled on all these thousands of islands in the Pacific, including here, of course, one of the most isolated pai'aina in the world. And then once we got here, right, we've seen this picture that we were able to grow our population and have upwards of 1 million people living in Hawaii. And how did we have this ability to sustain ourselves when we don't come anywhere near that today? With over 90% of everything being shipped in today, back then, full self-sustaining through this ahupua'a system. But all through just aloha ʻāina and proper resource management. From that 800,000 people, because of the introduced disease, we all know the story that happened here. 800,000 people went all the way down to 40,000 people. So 95% of the population passed away due to foreign introduced diseases. The remaining 5%, most of them went through the DOE. And as Kaleomanuiwa talked about in his talk last night, the history of the DOE is to educate, to assimilate, to educate, to colonize. That's what happened to that 5%. And it worked. It worked so well for those reasons that, as I showed that picture, my great-great-grandfather, one of the members of the Hui Aloha ʻāina, my great-grandparents, just a generation behind them, already starting to feel ashamed of being who they are, ashamed of being Hawaiian, even though their parents' generation was like, we're never going to give up until the very last aloha ʻāina. The next generation is already starting to feel these effects of colonization and assimilation so my great-grandparents and my grandparents' generation, same thing, lots of stories about not wanting to be brown, not wanting to acknowledge who we were, where we come from, until the 1970s, around then. And then my parents' generation, many of you in this room, woke up. Woke up. But it didn't just happen overnight and out of nowhere. This new sense of Hawaiian consciousness that was being born was fed by these organizations that were created, such as the Hui Alaloa or Molokaʻi, where many of those members also were part of and founded Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana. It was fed through organizations like the Polynesian Voyaging Society, where these three individuals were the founders: Ben Finney, Herb Carney, and Tommy Holmes. And these guys and the guys of PKO, they had this dream and this radical imagination of a better future for their keiki. Whether they thought of the social impacts it was going to create at the time or not, this radical imagination that these three guys I'm speaking of now had to build a va'a, to sail it thousands of miles away to Tahiti and use traditional navigational techniques. That's crazy, right? If we think about that, how are you going to do that? If you think about that, never happened in Hawaii for people say hundreds of years. I hear people say 400, 500, 600 years. And now after this time of all of our kupuna, our makua, not even wanting to be Hawaiian, these guys are going to create a canoe and sail it using traditional techniques thousands of miles away. That's a radical imagination. That's what these guys had. What that was going to do was to provide a counter story to the theories that were being put forth by people like Andrew Sharp and Thor Heyerdahl on how we got here, right? We know the stories. They jumped on some kind of boat, some kind of raft, some kind of canoe. They went out, maybe could navigate 100, 200 miles out to sea before they're at the mercy of the winds and the waves and the swells and the currents, and there's no way they could navigate. That's crazy, right? Even that theory, that's crazy to think about. If you think about it from another scientific way, is that, because Hawaii is so isolated, this ʻāina is thousands of miles away from continents, that everything, all the plants and the animals, a lot of it is endemic to Hawaii. Once something got here, they evolved into their own species, and there's a high rate of endemism in Hawaii. And they say that every 10,000 years or so, a new species got to Hawaii. Every 10,000 years, somehow wind, waves, whatever, brought something to Hawaii. 10,000 years. What is the chances people going to get on a raft that they cannot navigate, they don't know where they're going, what they're doing, that they were to go and land here in Hawaii? 10,000 years every time a new species. I don't know. Anyway, so they had this radical imagination that they were going to do this. They began raising money for this project in 1973, and almost 41 years to this day, 5 days away from now, 41 years, is when they launched Hōkūleʻa at Kualoa, Hakipu'u on Oahu. So building a va'a was one thing, but they still lack the knowledge of how they're actually going to do it. They searched throughout the Pacific, through Polynesia with our cousins there, and couldn't find someone who was willing to teach. They heard about this island of Saddlewall in Micronesia, and so the members of the Polynesian Voyaging Society went there. They met up with this guy, P.S. Maupielu, and he was willing to teach. He's a master navigator, and most importantly for us, that he was willing to teach. There were navigators that they found in Polynesia, but they're either too old or for their own reasons couldn't or didn't want to teach us. And it's surprising, actually, that he decided to teach. Usually the sacred knowledge of navigation was passed down through the families, through the immediate families. Not only were we not his immediate family, but we're from thousands of miles away, where maybe they haven't heard of Hawaii. Probably most of the people in Hawaii hasn't even heard of Saddlewall. Even to this day, even after all of the success, haven't heard of Saddlewall. But he was willing to teach. And so he agreed. So now they had a va'a, and they had a navigator. They had someone with the knowledge of our ancestors. And a year later, after the canoe was launched in Kualoa, just 1 year later, they left. They were going to go to Tahiti. There was no GPS at the time, right? They didn't have a sat phone. There's no cell phones. I believe they didn't even have a sextant on board, but they had Mo. and that's all they needed. And they pretty much said, shoot, okay, we'll call you from Tahiti. We'll call you from Tahiti. And they went. Really different time then as it is now. But the interesting thing about this too is that they had Mao, but Mao, he's never been below the equator. He's never seen the southern stars in person, but he was willing to do it. In an interview, he was asked, where does all this courage come from? And I believe Kalekoa talked about this at this last talk too. But one of the things he's famous for saying is, if I have courage, it's because I have faith in the teachings of my ancestors. 30 days later, they pulled Tahiti out of the sea. 17,000 people, they estimate, came down to greet the canoe on their shores, over 50% of the island. Just that in itself is amazing. If you think about what it would take today for 50% of our island, 5% of our island to do anything, 5% to do anything, what would it take? I don't know. UH football game? I don't know. What would it take? But these guys, like 50% of the island, 17,000 people came to visit the canoe. Wrote stories, songs, everything. There's so much people on the canoe that they began to sink the back of the canoe, is what they tell us. And then if we were to think about why so many people came to greet the canoe, why would they do that? And it's, if we think about who they are and who we are, we're the same people. We have the same culture. We have the same ancestors. We have the same akua. We speak the same language. Our stories are the same as their stories. So our success, the success of Hawaiʻi, the success of Hōkūleʻa, of reaching Tahiti in a way, the same way as our ancestors have been doing for thousands of years, was a success and an affirmation and a confirmation that their kupuna, their stories that was passed down through them is true, just as it was true for us. We have the same stories, and not just the stories of our ancestors, but the stories of what was happening at the time, whether it's in Hawaiʻi or in Tahiti, with colonization, with assimilation, with all that. It's all the same. Some of the original guys, but the landing of Hōkūleʻa on Tahiti and the successful return back to Hawaiʻi helped to ignite this fire within Hawaiʻi to tu'ita hoʻiuli, to hold fast to our steering paddle and guide our canoe, to guide our lahui in a direction that we want to go in. It helped reclaim who we were as a people. It helped us branch out into all these different things of our culture, these aspects of our culture, whether it be hula or language or whatever. A lot of it was because of the success of Hōkūleʻa. It's not just the success, but I would say that, but at the same time, the same year Hōkūleʻa left, 1976, was the same year that the PKO guys left and went to Kaho'olawe and made their first initial landing on Kaho'olawe. The same year that people, as Kalekoa, I'm going to just keep talking about Kalekoa all night. But as Kalekoa said in his last talk, that, while Mauna Kea was happening, Hawaiians were sailing around the world on this Mālama Honua voyage. The same thing was happening back then, 1976. While Hawaiians were sailing from Hawaii to Tahiti and back, Hawaiians were doing the same thing, fighting for the land, going to Kaho'olawe to protest this bombing of the sacred island. Let's see. And so the success that these two organizations were having was helping to feed, as I was saying, all these different aspects of our culture. Even though the Merry Monarch began in 1971, the hula competition began in 1971 as a way to attract tourists to Hilo. It wasn't until 1976, the same year, that according to the Merry Monarch website, says that's when Let me just make sure I get them right, what they said. I think it's on another slide. But that's when they started to attract hordes of people to the Merry Monarch Festival to watch hula. It was the same year that all of this was happening. And another thing that happened soon after this was an opening of Hawaiian immersion schools. It wasn't too long after where people was like, hey, so, okay, this is just me thinking. I didn't actually hear this from someone, but hey. So if we're gonna reclaim our culture, we need to do it through reclaiming our language, for what is a people without the language? Within a language contains worldview, contains history, contains genealogies, contains everything. So we better open our own Hawaiian immersion schools. We don't need to be learning about in 1492. What happens after that? Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. How does that help us, our keiki here in Hawaii? You know, we need to be learning about Keawe, Pi'ilani, Kakuiheva, Mano Kalanipo. We need to be learning about those guys. And no better way to learn about them, to create our own schools in our own language with our own curriculum. Let's see. Yep. Oh yeah. And then with the opening of the immersion schools and the success of these things, became the first graduating class, 1999, of the Hawaiian Immersion School. Same year as me. I didn't go there. Went to Kaiser. But soon after, you know, now we have graduate programs at the universities. As they were saying about me earlier, I was part of one of their original students from their program, and I got an AA, and I was lucky enough to enroll in language here. And now there's a bachelor's degree you can get at UH. You can get a graduate degree. You can write dissertations, thesis, all these things in Hawaiian language that I would say is a direct result of the success of Hōkūleʻa, the success of what was going on with Kaho'olawe. Not only can you write those things in the Hawaiian language department or the Hawaiian studies department, the Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge, you can write them in all different degrees. I heard of one being written in history, in geography, in political science, all written in Hawaiian. And I'm sure with guys like Kamauli Kuara, a friend of some of ours inside here, he's a teacher in the English department at Manoa. I'm sure with guys like that, you know, it's not going to be long before Hawaiians are writing in Hawaiian language to get an English graduate degree. Kind of funny to think about. But if we look at the people who's going through these programs, people like Brian, people like Kahikina de Silva, you know, all these amazing intellectual people, guarantee that's going to happen. Originally, Hōkūleʻa was built for just one voyage. That original voyage, they went on from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976. But after that voyage, we know what happened. Hōkūleʻa continues to sail currently on this worldwide voyage. And I just wanted to point out that in 1976, before they left, a lot of people were calling it just an anthropological experiment. Most of the people thought it would fail, this radical imagination that they had was just that and it wouldn't come true. But now all of these voyages on this one, 2013, and then a list of a bunch of islands that Hōkūleʻa has been to in the Pacific before the worldwide voyage even began. If we were to list all the places they've been now, it would be at least twice that much. But before this worldwide voyage, all the places where they went. And because of the success that Hōkūleʻa has had over the last 41 years, there's now 6 different voyaging canoes here in Hawaii alone. So there's Hōkūleʻa, there's Hawaii Loa, there's Makali'i, Namahoi on Kauai, Mo'okiho Pi'ilani on Maui, Hiki on Alia here in Hawaii. That looks like these guys. And at least 14 more. Sure, she says. At least 14 more throughout the Pacific that all trace their histories, the genealogy of their canoe back to Hōkūleʻa and the success that she has had. Along with this rebirth of our canoe cultures is this rebirth of the knowledge systems that go along with these things. Star names, star systems, and all these navigational practices that go with them. An example of this is a star map from Tahiti, put together by Jean-Claude Teri'i e Ro'o I Te Ra'i, one of the head guys for the Whawhaite voyaging canoe. But their star map that they have that outlines the stories of their kupuna onto the stars that we use today. Another example, this was when we went to Tonga. On the right is their star navigational system written out on a paper that went along with the idea of a kanoa, a Hawaiian ava serving ava container? Umeke type thing? Thank you. But they were saying how their navigational systems, even though they stopped navigating, was all the same as how they drank ava, how they situated themselves around the kanoa to drink ava. On the left is a picture of the Ha'amanga a Maui, called the Stonehenge of the Pacific. It's huge. It was built about 1200 AD, and it's one of their navigational systems on the ground where they believe that or they say it lines up with Kealapolohiwa Akane, which for us is when the sun is our summer solstice. For them, because they're down there, it's in their winter solstice. Then after we met with them, we learned about their place. We continued on our voyage. It's hard to see in this picture, but 18 days later from our voyage, we landed here. Well, we landed in Aotearoa, and we're taken up to this place in Aorere, Anakala, or Papa Hekinukumai, one of the founding guys of modern Maori navigation and voyaging. His star compass is built on this large field, and all of his star houses are different carved ki'i that they have to represent the places that they point. And then the Mālama Honua. So with all the success that Hōkūleʻa has across the Pacific, with them, with us, through the revitalization of our culture, of our language, of many different aspects, it was the hope that we'd have the same sort of success wherever we went around the world. So far, it proved that we would throughout the Pacific, and now we had this idea of going around the world to talk about Aloha ʻāina, to talk about Mālama Honua, to see what kind of Aloha ʻāina, Mālama Honua type actions they were doing in their different places, and to highlight those stories. Specifically, we wanted to focus on how they were caring, how their Aloha ʻāina actions were put in practice to care for their lands and their oceans. After the first voyage, we had a saying, he moku he wa'a, he wa'a he moku, meaning that the canoe is an island and an island is a canoe. It's easy to see when you're out in the middle of the ocean, like in this picture, and you're on this tiny little canoe surrounded by ocean, that all you have on board is all you have on board, right? If you drink all your water, there's no more water. Right? If you eat all your food, there's no food unless you're catching them through fishing. And if we can sustain ourselves, if we can manage our resources that we have on the canoe, we should be able to manage them on our islands. They're a metaphor for one another. And then we had this same idea of extrapolating on he moku he wa'a he wa'a he moku to he honua he wa'a. That, although it's much bigger, we're no longer a tiny canoe in the middle of the ocean. We're no longer just Hawaiʻi, but we're an entire world. Just like the canoe, we cannot get off if we use all our resources. If we don't get along with one another, we have to be able to maintain these relationships and care for our natural resources. The vision for the worldwide voyage from Uncle Pinky Thompson, Nainoa Thompson's father. He was the president of the Polynesian Voyaging Society for many years. And then Lacey Veach, a Hawaii-born astronaut. The PVS, we believe that the greatest environmental issue of our time is to protect our oceans, that over 50% of our oxygen comes from the ocean, something that I would never have thought of before this, but they say over 50% of the oxygen comes from the ocean, and that if we don't care for the ocean, not only are we not going to have fish to eat, but then now we're talking about not being able to breathe. You know, all the life forms in the ocean is what's creating the oxygen, allowing us to be here. And then the map of our voyage, all color coordinated. So right now we're on the right side of the screen, on the green, and the leg that I just went on was from Cape Town to Natal, that point where it sticks the furthest out. In Brazil, it sticks the furthest out to the east. Yeah. Yeah. But before we left to go around the world, it's important that we went around Hawaii to make sure we have support of everybody back in our own communities. How can we go to communities around the world without even talking to ourselves first, without gaining the support of us? So we went around Hawaii at least twice before we went. And this is from one of the places we landed in, Kailua, so where I'm at now. So I threw those pictures of Kailua in there. Hosted by all the Kailua halau. Auntie Mapu de Silva, actually Maya's kumu here. They're pictured in the front in the yellow. She was saying that when Hōkūleʻa first came to Kailua was 2005. Hōkūleʻa's never been into Kailua before that. First time was in 2005. That was really the first time that all the halau of Kailua got together and worked together and hosted the crew, which was like the original, a lot of them were the original voyagers in 1976. But still this power that the canoe has to still bring together groups who normally don't work together, even though they're right next to each other in Kailua, still has this power to attract everybody to come together and work together. After going around Hawaii, it's time to leave. This is from Palekai, Keaukaha, Hawaii, on our departure day of May 2014. What makes this voyage different, like for the 1976 voyage, they didn't even have a phone to call. It's like, we'll call you when we get there. On this voyage, we got iPads, we got satellites. We're still navigating in a traditional way, but we're able to connect to the families back home. We're able to connect to people all around the world through Google Hangouts, through iPad updates, through all this incredible technology that we have now. This is Tai Eva'u. He was a crew member with us. He's from Fatuhiva in the Marquesas, doing a Hangout or an iPad update with Tahiti, with all of the, with majority of the French Polynesia peoples that speak Tahitian or a form of it. So here he is on that voyage, going to Tahiti, talking to the kids. And then what it looks like from the opposite side. So this is now what we're in the classroom, looking at the TV. On the upper left, we see Kat Fuller, one of our crew members, in Samoa, talking to Hawaii. So you can be anywhere around the world with this technology, and you can talk about where we are, what we're doing, what's going on. And you can see all of our keiki here. Lots of questions they have. But with this technology, you can track where we are at all times, and they upload photos and videos and blogs, and you can visit our website, www.hōkūleʻa.com, and see where they are now and see what they've been doing. You can see as soon as they leave where they are in relation to their course that they plotted. You don't need to wait for crew members to come back and go to every single classroom that you want to reach to talk to the kids. You can have things like this where the Google Hangouts allows you to connect with multiple classrooms at one time, all tuning in to talk to a crew member, who's live on board the canoe, whether you're at a dock in Samoa or in the middle of the ocean. And wherever we land, the focus is really on the kids, that if we can reach the kids and instill this aloha ʻāina within them for their people, for their culture, then that'll inspire a lot of change. Here could be anywhere in the Pacific, really. The bottom left with these girls could be Waiʻanae, could be Keokaha, but it's actually Tahiti. Our cousins again in Tahiti. From Tahiti, we went on to the left. The Cook Islands, the picture up above on the right is Samoa. Down below is Tonga. From Tonga to Aotearoa. And then we left our familiar home of the Pacific, of our cousins, and we traveled out across the Tasman Sea. Now we're leaving the ocean that Hōkūleʻa has been sailing in this whole time, never left the Pacific. Now we go across to Australia. But again, the focus is on meeting with indigenous peoples around the world and finding out and teaching and mostly learning about their aloha ʻāina actions that they do. So even though we're sailing past Sydney Harbor, right past the Sydney Opera House there on the left, we still come in to try to connect with indigenous cultures. Here. From Australia, continued on to Bali, to Indonesia. Indonesia had a couple other stops before we got to Africa. And then in Cape Town, here's where our crew met up with the canoe again for our leg to go across the Atlantic. And I've been with PVS since 1998, about 1999, and there's actually a class that Kumu Dennis Harada was a part of in the summertime. It was the first time, actually I met Kapiolani that same summer, 1998, on the canoe, talking about Mālama Hawaii. But in 1998 I started. I was a crew member. I was a watch captain. I was an apprentice navigator with Kapiolani. This trip, I was then going to be the navigator. And something about this trip was a lot different than my last trip. And although I've navigated before with Uncle Bruce from Aotearoa to Australia, this trip was a lot more challenging because of the tiny, minuscule little islands that's in the middle of the Atlantic, surrounded by a lot of ocean. When we went from Aotearoa to Australia, if we think about navigation today and the success and accomplishments they had, Aotearoa to Australia is it's a pretty big target. Australia, big island, hard to miss. There was another island we went to before Australia. That was a tiny island, but if we didn't get there because we weren't planning a stop, that wasn't that big of a deal. Australia, just keep going, you'll get there. We got to Australia. Now we're leaving Cape Town, going up the coast of Namibia, up the African continent, hanging a left. Here we go. Hanging a left to St. Helena, to Ascension, to Fernando before, and then to Natal. We couldn't miss these islands. We had to get there. We had to get to St. Helena. That's where we're reprovisioning the canoe. As was said earlier, that this was the longest voyage that Hōkūleʻa has ever done, and it would have been extra challenging to do the whole thing nonstop one time. So we had to get to St. Helena to reprovision our canoe. So this was the challenge, our plan, our route, our course. And this is how long it took. Part of our planning process, actually. But yeah, 700 miles up the coast to Namibia, taking a left, 11 days, 1,260 miles to St. Helena, up 685 miles to Ascension, 1,260 miles more to Fernando de Noronha before we then got to the big target of South America. All these tiny islands in between that. But we knew the conditions were going to be challenging, even if we had fair winds and following seas, which actually we did the whole time. It was a really nice sail. But just like temperature-wise, we knew that was going to be a challenge. You can see how cold we are in this picture. Yeah, that's me in the bottom left. But I'm wearing, it's hard to see in that picture, but I have like 2 beanies on, my hood over, a scarf around my face and neck. You can see everybody in the picture has boots on. The guys steering have gloves on. It's a cold trip. We were wearing a lot of clothes. But the closer and closer we got to the equator, the hotter it got. This is actually a picture from that leg, although it looks really old. The hotter it got and the blacker we got and the more clothes that we ended up taking off. But it's something we expected, we expected that, we planned for it, we were ready. But what we weren't prepared for, what we didn't plan on, was fog. We can see that this picture on the left, that sun is about 9 o'clock, and there's no clouds, it's just fog. The picture on the right, that's our escort boat, about 100 yards behind us, right? That's just fog. Hōkūleʻa has never been through fog before. So how do we navigate like that? We couldn't see our stars, our moon. Most of the time we couldn't see the sun. And the conditions were that the wind was so light for so long that there was no swells. We didn't really have anything to go off of. And even when the fog wasn't low on the horizon, like how it is now, it was high up above, blocking all the stars and everything. And just causing a lot of, I think the technical term that Nainoa uses is brain damage. It was causing a lot of brain damage. And just thinking how, like what, where, what? But then thinking about the teachings of Mau to Nainoa before Nainoa navigated in 1980 was, the last lesson was to, Mau asked him if he sees Hawaii. If he sees Tahiti while he's standing at Lanai Lookout. His answer is, of course, I don't see the island, but I have a picture of it in my mind. And Mau was okay. That, never forget that. If you forget that picture in your mind, then you're lost. And it's the same thing that I'm sure was told to Uncle Bruce, and Uncle Bruce told to Kapiolani and I for our leg was, don't ever forget this picture of where the island is. Think about it, posturcize it, and that's where we have to go. That's where the island is. So we continued on going. Unfortunately, put this picture in there. But the crossing of the Atlantic Ocean was a major milestone for multiple reasons, not just because it was the Atlantic Ocean, a place where Hōkūleʻa has never been, probably an ocean where maybe no Hawaiian has ever crossed on a va'a navigated by the stars, probably where no Pacific peoples have crossed in one of their vessels by navigating by the stars. This was the only time. It was the first time and likely the only time ever that it were to happen. But it wasn't just for that reason. It was also because of this transition of knowledge. And yes, I was a navigator, but this story is not really about me. This story is about Uncle Bruce and his ability to pass on the knowledge that he gained from his kumu, which is Nainoa, and Mau, from Nainoa's kumu, which was Mau. And it's about the knowledge that our kupuna had. It's about the ike kupuna, that their systems of navigating in the Pacific to thousands of miles away that you can't see can also be applied to the Atlantic and can also be taught to people even like me. Yeah. And then again, this is an example of a living culture that navigation and this type of work didn't belong to ancient peoples only. It was brought back and passed down through Nainoa, through Uncle Bruce, through me, through Kapiolani, through others, and will be continued to pass on. But voyaging in and of itself is not just about the lucky ones who get to sail, but it's about the people who are there at home who allow us to sail. It's about our lahui as a whole. It's about recognizing our aumakua and our kupuna who are always traveling with us, whether we see them or not. So just a few mo'olelo about the interactions of our kupuna with us on the last leg. This right here is St. Helena Island. Our first island that we're navigating to. As we're heading up the coast to Namibia, those first 700 miles was a coastal sail. We didn't need to navigate that. It wasn't until we made our left-hand turn towards St. Helena. In this island, 2,685 feet tall. You guys may recognize the name, St. Helena Island. It is a place where Napoleon Bonaparte was put on there when he was caught by the English. He threw him on there. But it's 2,680 feet tall. In theory, we could see the island from 40 miles away. That's not what happened on this trip. The conditions we were having, it wasn't until we were 9 miles out from the island that we could finally see it. But we knew it was there. We knew it was close. We knew we were within this 50-mile radius because there's birds everywhere. It's kind of funny that going across the Atlantic, there wasn't too much birds. Like the Pacific, there's kind of a lot of birds. Eva, Eva, Kauai, those sorts. But across the Atlantic, there wasn't a lot of birds. And when we get close to an island, we see a lot of birds. We know there's an island there. So when we got there, we saw choke birds. We know the island is close by. But, we didn't know exactly where it was. My slides got a little changed around. But so we're sailing along. We know within this 50-mile radius, but we don't know where the island is. We know it's close. We knew on our course that we were headed, that we were south of our line that we wanted to be on, that takes us straight to St. Helena. Keeping track of it, we knew we were south. We knew we had to turn north to get to the island. So we're doing all these calculations in our head. Okay, so based off of this wind speed, the wind angle, where we gotta go. Okay, if we turn now, if we jibe, so that our sails are on the other side of the canoe, and we head this direction, by morning time, we should be able to turn, and the island would be about that same latitude that we were at. So we're like, okay, yep, let's do that. So we turn. We're going up, and the wind died. The wind kind of just backed off. As it's been doing the entire trip, the direction was changing. It wasn't as easy as we hoped it was going to be. And our plan was to sail, we're going to jibe, we're going to sail that direction all night, sunrise, we're going to turn, it's going to be there. When the wind backed off and the sunrise came, then we had to make a decision again. Should we turn now as we originally planned, or should we keep going to make up the miles we think we need to go to get to the latitude? As Nainoa often says that navigation, or the navigator makes hundreds of decisions every day, that being a navigator is about making these decisions about, did the wind change? Did the swell that just hit the bow of the canoe, does that mean we're off course? We're no longer going where we want to go? Did that rock of the canoe, what does that mean? Does that mean something? So it's time to make a decision. Our calculations, because the wind dies, maybe we should keep going. Maybe we should turn, but maybe we should keep going was more. We were thinking it through, thinking all these calculations, then right in front of us, bango, lightning and thunder, like right in front of our canoe, not far. And there's no other clouds in the sky that indicated there was going to be thunder or lightning. There's nothing. There was just this cloud, like right there, and all of a sudden, lightning from the clouds to the ocean. By the way, this isn't a picture of that specific time, but this is what happened. This is what happened. Little disclaimer. So we're going, and we're like, okay, no, we should turn. We got to turn. You know, all of our calculations of where we thought we needed to go got thrown out. We knew we were within this 50 miles. Boom, lightning right in front of us where we're headed. We turn, we decide to turn. We turn, the cloud disappears. There's no more thunder. There's no more lightning. There's no more nothing. And then about 3 hours after this, the island was straight in front of our canoe, right between the two manu. It couldn't have been any more perfect that the island was right there. And it's not to say that it was there because of us. It's to say that it was there because of this ho'ailona, of this kupuna, of this aumakua who's telling us where to go. And there's multiple stories like that throughout the history of Hōkūleʻa, not just on this leg. This was just another example of it. And to listen to our aumakua, and there is the island. You know, if we would have kept on going, if this lightning never came, you know, maybe we would have decided, nah, the wind kind of backed off. We should keep going in this direction. And maybe we wouldn't have found St. Helena. You know, like as I said, we could see it 40 miles out. We didn't see it till we're 9 miles out. You know, we could have passed the island just 10 miles away, and we wouldn't even have known we passed the island. We would have seen the birds, but we wouldn't have known we passed the island until we didn't see any more birds. Lightning showed us where to go. Another way in which kupuna visited us and aumakua visited us was through orcas. It was another time when there was this pretty heavy set of brain damage happening, of not really knowing what direction we're going at that exact moment. Soon after, you know, almost going crazy, these orcas appeared, and you know, you see dolphins, you see whales, you see things like this. It immediately lifts everyone's spirit. So right after these orcas came, boom, the wind came and allowed us to sail the direction we need to go to. We then saw orcas. The next time we saw it was going to Fernando de Noronha. They came right past our canoe the day before we got to Fernando de Noronha. And again, that island is only about 10 square miles big. You know, it's 1,200 miles away from our last destination. But these orcas came right by our canoe, and we took it as a ho'ailona of our aumakua that the island is right there. Punahu'ula, another sign of aumakua visiting us. We saw Punahu'ula like this the day before we found Ascension Island and the day of Fernando de Noronha. But hard to see in this picture. But sometimes that, you know, aumakua visit us multiple times in the same day. And you say, how would you know it's the same aumakua in the same day? Here's the story. We had Uncle Mel Paoa, is a longtime crew member of the Polynesian Voyaging Society of Hōkūleʻa. He recently passed away. He was famous for, you know, just being so olu, so kind to everybody. You know, just his ano about him made him like the most favorite anakala there was. But he was famous for having only 4 fingers. He cut off one of his fingers. I think it was right over here. He cut him off. But because he didn't want a nub, he took the whole thing off, so that when you look at his hand, it looked like this. But it was his middle finger, only 4 fingers. He didn't have this on. So he'd always say, like when you ask him, like, hey, how much we need? He'd be like, oh, we need 5. We need 5. But he only got 4 fingers, so 5. And it was one of his like favorite jokes. He'd always say. And so he's known for all of these finger hand jokes. But early this morning, we saw these clouds in the sky, and it's hard to see with this lighting, but lit behind this moon was these clouds that looked just like a hand. It was the day of his birthday. These clouds, just like his hand. The way it's lit by the moon, everything. It's like we're all tripping out. Wow, Uncle Mel, is waving at us. And then the sun came up, and then this bird came to the canoe. And, we often get birds that come to the canoe. Sometimes they land. Sometimes they sit on the canoe for like 3-4 days. But this was the first time a bird came to the canoe on our whole trip. And usually when you see the birds and they fly in, they have a hard time landing on the canoe. Everything is rocking, whatever. They fly up to the canoe. They kind of like fly backwards, check it out. Sometimes they try and they fall down and whatever. All these things happen. They have a hard time. This bird was the first bird that came to the canoe. And this is Lohiau Paoa. Unfortunately, he was going to be here tonight. Unfortunately, he's not here. But this is Uncle Mel's son right there. This bird came in. He put up his hand. And he was saying, he's like, oh, I just made eye contact with the bird. It's like, he was asking him, how? What? What? He's like, I just looked at the bird, and the bird looked at me. We made eye contact, and I put up my hand, and the bird landed right on his hand. So it came in, without any kind of hesitation, boom, landed right on his hand. And he just hold his hand, and the bird was staying on his hand for a long time. But just as if it's been doing it its whole life, it's sort of like, oh, Uncle Mel. Uncle Mel again, he came. It's his birthday, he's waving at us. And now he lands on his son's hand? Like what? Yeah, crazy. And then another thing that happened was we caught a fish. And, Uncle Bruce, besides being like the best captain, the best navigator, the best, all of these best things, he's also like the best fisherman. And so every time we sail with him, we catch a lot of fish. And like every other day, probably we average catching fish. On this voyage, we haven't been catching fish. I'm not sure why. The health of the Atlantic Ocean, I don't know. We haven't caught any fish for like 5 days. And then we caught this mahi-mahi the same day as his birthday, the same day as all these other things, and reminded us of our last trip we had across the Tasman Sea. It was actually Eddie Aikal's birthday, and we caught this pretty nice ahi on his birthday. So we're like, oh, Uncle Mel again. He came and we caught this fish. And what made it extra special, besides it just being a fish that we caught on that day after these two things happened, was on the last leg that Uncle Mel sailed on, that Kapiolani and I was a part of. Uncle Mel was our cook. It was his kuleana to feed the crew every day, breakfast, dinner, sometimes lunch. It's his kuleana to feed the crew. And when we caught this fish, it was this recognition of Anakala Mel. He waved with us. He came to us in this bird form, but that he's continuing on this kuleana of feeding the crew. Yeah. And here's a picture of him, Uncle Mel. Yeah. And there's many examples of Aumakua visiting us and Kupuna visiting us when we're on the ocean doing things that our Kupuna has done. But I'm sure there's many things, many stories that you guys have of Aumakua visiting you here on land as well. And recognizing them and their ho'ailona is what Aloha ʻāina is about. But as we're traveling along on our voyage around the world, the Mālama Honua, that we must not also lose track of what's going on back home in our own communities, wherever they may be. Just like Aloha ʻāina has many meanings, the Mālama Honua Honua itself has many meanings as well. Honua is often thought of as pertaining to the world, but Honua in and of itself could mean your ʻāina. It could mean the island you're on. That could be your Honua. It could be your community. It could be your ohana. It could be you could be yourself. Yourself is a Honua. And this idea that if we can Mālama Honua ourselves, then we can Mālama Honua our ohana, our communities, our islands, and Mālama Honua our world. And to think about, how are we going to change the world? How are we going to protect the world, take care of the world? It all begins with Mālama Honua as us, as individuals, taking care of ourselves. And all the individual and collective Aloha ʻāina actions that we do, Mālama Honua actions that we do, are being compiled, they're compounding in and of, on top of each other, creating this new reality for us and the generations to follow. It wasn't that long ago that Kaho'olawe was regularly being bombed by the U.S. and their allies. And of course, now it's not. Just in last December, we had, according to Paipaio He'eia, 2,000 people went to He'eia Fish Pond and helped to Panikapuka, helped to fix the wall of the fish pond. We think, when was the last time 2,000 people showed up to help restore a fish pond wall? That's probably hundreds of years ago, but that just happened just this past December. We had thousands of people standing up for Mauna Kea, what Kalekoa was talking about last time he was here. Thousands of people standing up for Mauna Kea against multinational interests and billions of dollars. And we came together, and so far it looks like we won. Our language was nearly lost, but it's being spoken more and more today and becoming a part of everyday reality for a lot of people. 40 years ago, nobody thought that Hōkūleʻa could travel along our ancestral routes, our ancestral pathways, in the ways of our ancestors. But now we're sailing around the world. And there was no doubt before this worldwide voyage that we could sail to wherever we wanted in the Pacific using Hōkūleʻa, using our va'a like this, using these navigational systems passed down through Mau, through Nainoa, through guys like Uncle Bruce. But now with this worldwide voyage, we can sail anywhere around the world that this navigational systems don't just work and aren't just being applied to the Pacific, but now it's across the Tasman, we went across the Indian, we went across the Atlantic. Now we're going all the way up the coast to America. We're going to go through to Panama. We're doing all of these things that 40 years ago was like, people think this would never happen, that if they tried to do it, that they would fail. But it's a part of everyday life. And I know I'm kind of running, or I ran out of time. But one final thing I just want to share about Hōkūleʻa and Aloha ʻāina. It's an update from our last leg that Kumu Dennis was talking about, and we're showing about updates live from the canoe. As I said earlier, I don't really like to give talks like this. I don't like to get videotaped, but they always, I guess it's part of the kuleana that you take on when you decide, or when you're chosen to do navigation, is that you're going to provide these updates. So I'm always like, nah, get someone else to do it. Video them, they get them. But anyway, I had to do it, and I didn't want to show it, but my wahine over here says I should show it. So let me see if I can put it down. How do you find that? Do that.
Au hea wale oi ka pua lili hua, a me nā pua maka mai e ae ma Hawaiʻi la, a me nā honua holoko ai hahai mai ana ia mākou ma kia wahi hua ka i ka apuni honua ka Mālama Honua. E ino hoi ke ia ka i leo kipa o ko o kahi leo manuiwa, ke kipa aku nei ia o ko mai kia waa mai ma ka atalana kila aku i ko o ko home pumehana. E ino mako ke noke aku nei ka holo i Ascension, he wahi moku liʻiliʻi no ia ma waina kono ka atalana kila. Haʻalele mako ia St. Helena e kolu la aku nei e ino mako i waina konu o ke ia mahele o ka huakaʻi mai a St. Helena i Ascension. Ke mea, aia mako ma kahi o e kolu haneli mile mai a Ascension i St. Helena no leila. E lua paha, e kolu paha la, e ike aku ai i Ascension. Ke noʻonoʻo nei mako apopo paha a ia la aku e ike ia ana no ka manu o ku a ke kai mau manu e aʻe e hoʻoi ana mai ia mako i kahi o ka waʻa ma kia moana nui a kea. Ua ike ia no kahi manu iwa i ke ia la he hoʻelona mai ka ino ia o ia no ka makamua ka ike ano kahi iwa ma kia huakaʻi holokoʻa. Nō ua mahalo nui no ia. O ka hoʻokele ana i kia waiwaʻu ua ano paʻakiki o iai ua nui ka keau o ka lewa he mea maʻamau ka ike ole i ana o nā hoku o ka lā o ka mahina a me ka wili mau o ka makani a ole e pā mai kahi wā like no ka wā lōʻihi. Nā ua paʻakiki ka holo ana e naʻe e ino ke holo nei me ka mahalo ana i nā akua na aumakua me nā kupuna o kākou e alakaʻi mai ana i kia waʻa a pai pono ma Ascension he moku liʻiliʻi. Oia wale no ke ia wā e kamiliu ho kākou ma kahi wā he leo aloha ia oko e nā kanaka kupa ai ki Aloha ʻāina mai ka waʻa mai o ka waʻa kaulua o ka atalana kila he wahi leo aloha ia oko a pau. Aloha.
So although that was a video of me, the reason for showing that video, and unfortunately there wasn't another video that I could show, but was not to talk about me or to highlight me, but just to mention that I'm the product of Hōkūleʻa and the success that Hōkūleʻa has, that I'm able to be here to speak Hawaiian to you guys, that we can put what we've learned into practice on our canoe while we're sailing across the ocean. We're not just sailing as our ancestors have done, but we're again beginning to speak our language that our ancestors spoke. So we're seeing the stars, the same stars they saw. We're feeling the same winds they felt. We're being pushed along by the same swells that they felt. And we're beginning to use our language again that they used. By the time I was born, Hōkūleʻa has already navigated. They have already went to Tahiti and back twice. Hōkūleʻa was always a part of reality, that you could do that this was possible. So, growing up, after Hōkūleʻa, it's like people of my generation have already been born with the pride of who we were, of our ancestors, of being Hawaiian, whereas the generation before didn't have that same pride. But because of Hōkūleʻa and PKO, that was a normal thing. I was able to attend KCC here and enroll in Hawaiian language classes. I would say because of the success of Hōkūleʻa, and I'm able to go to UH and get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in Hawaiian language and Hawaiian studies because of the success of Hōkūleʻa. And it was really our parents' generation who had the courage to once again to pick up this hoi uli, to navigate us, to steer us in a direction we want to go. It's the kuleana of the next generation to then accept the hoi uli, to learn from them, to nanaka maka, to ho'olohe ka pepeau, to hana kalima, to learn from them and carry on these same traditions, these same cultural practices that they were doing, until we pass it on to our next generation. With all these accomplishments that Hōkūleʻa and PKO and having that, it's a sign that there is nothing that we can't do, that if we all come together to Aloha ʻāina and to Mālama Honua, for a continuous better reality for our keiki that was given to us by our parents. We got to give it on to the next generations. I will end my talk, the last slide, with this prophecy chant that was talking about what was above will come down, and what was below will come up, and that all the islands will once again be united, and eku ana kapaya. And then we'll take some questions. So if you know it, we can all do it together. E iho ana o luna e pi'i ana o lalo e huina moku e ku ana kapaya. E iho ana o luna e pi'i ana o lalo e huina moku e ku ana kapaya. E iho ana o luna e pi'i ana o lalo e huina moku e ku ana kapaya. Mahalo. And again, if there's any questions, there's some really good people in this crowd that can answer them. Good question. The question was, when you're navigating, how many hours of sleep does a navigator get? It all depends on a lot of things. It depends on the conditions we have. Who's steering has a lot to do with it. And what kind of clues that we have. But in general, I would say on this trip, I probably, while navigating, got about 2 hours of sleep a night. And mostly in naps, like a half hour, an hour, or something like that. It's something that Uncle Bruce, something actually I was really worried about before the first time. When you go on the canoe, at least for me, I like to sleep on the canoe. Before doing studying, learning navigation, it's like you're getting rocked to sleep. It's so nice. And so that was something that I was really concerned about. But I talked to Uncle Bruce about it. He was saying, when you go out into the ocean, there's something magical that happens, that your body is just able to adapt and you're able to do it. And to my own surprise, I was able to go off of about 2 hours of sleep a night for the entire trip. But I think a lot of it has to do with there's not a lot of distractions out there. There's no iPhones or presentations or TV or traffic or anything. There was just the action, the work that you're there to do. And as the navigator, you don't do a lot of physical things. One of Mao's teachings was that to not let your body get tired. So as a navigator, it's just kind of like, okay, let's go change the sail, and have just kind of telling other people to do it. A lot of them are getting a lot of sleep anyway. They can handle, and your job is just to keep that picture of the island in your mind. Yeah. Question? Yeah.
So the canoe's been, 41 years old?
41 years old in 5 days from now. Yep.
So how many times more can the canoe go around the world? I mean, is that structural stability already?
Yeah, well, yeah, good question. So the question is, how long can Hōkūleʻa continue to sail because of the structural stability of the canoe? 41 years old, it's pretty old, but before the worldwide voyage, Hōkūleʻa underwent a major dry dock, and she normally does before a big voyage. There's a lot of work that's being done, but in particular, before this worldwide voyage, because it's so long, there was a dry dock that happened. At least took a year to do that. We kept the original shell, the hulls, we kept all of that, but we updated it to change things like plywood to foam, lighten the canoe, and it's pretty much like a brand new canoe that we have now. And they say that Hōkūleʻa is good to go for another 40 more years before a similar type of dry dock will have to take place. And then while we're on the worldwide voyage, because it's taking so long, that there's 3 different dry docks that happen. So we're constantly maintaining the va'a. So there's a dry dock in Aotearoa, in Cape Town, and the next one, I believe, is in New Orleans. Yeah.
Did you have to swap out the ropes?
Yeah, so we changed all the ropes.
Even along the voyage?
We take ropes with us if we have to change, but we don't normally have to change them. There was some that was changed in Cape Town. Yeah, I think you had a question. I mean, yeah. I mean, there are people who have those numbers. Yeah. We have, there's a lot of people from all around the world. There's talks that people give that, and I think even on our website show where people from around the world have uploaded, have committed to their Aloha ʻāina type actions, Mālama Honua actions, all around the world. And I think there's a map on there that shows you where they are, and you can click on it and hear their story of what this elementary school is doing in South Africa or wherever. Yeah, but there's a whole media team that's a part of the Polynesian Voyaging Society now with this round the world trip, and it's OEV TV. Yeah. Question?
Did going around the world help other indigenous cultures and maybe cultures that were now part of their land to get together better? They, connect better. Part of it was, of course, the taking care of the land, but also that intercultural.
Well, we know that it happened before, and it continued to happen on this worldwide voyage around the Pacific, in places like Aotearoa specifically. I'm not too sure about how it brought other places together, such as Bali or South Africa, places like that. But there were groups that met the canoe at pretty much all the places. And South Africa, in Cape Town, was a big place where buses of kids came in to greet the canoe. And Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop, was there to host the canoe. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening. I think you had a question.
So much has happened since the first voyage
In language programs that were built because of the successes. I think it's a major milestone to have this radical imagination of sailing across the ocean, and how awesome that was. To me, I hope that there will be entire voyages where everybody who is sailing with us is also speaking our language, who there's subsequent generations that come after us, and now they're navigating, and you know, it continues to take us into the future through reclaiming and more of our culture from the past and using it in a modern world of today. Yeah. Question? Mm. Yeah. 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 Well, just the biggest difference that we saw was in the marine life. Like I was saying, you know, all the other voyages I've ever been on, we caught fish like every other day, and we were going through periods of 5 or 6 days of not catching any fish. There was a lot more birds we see in the Pacific that we didn't see in the Atlantic, even though we have the same kinds of birds in the Pacific as at Atlantic. There's a lot more in the Pacific, and we're not sure if it's because of a depleted, you know, fish stocks, and that's why there's less fish and there's less birds. We're not sure, but we do see plastics floating in the ocean and Atlantic, the same as we do in the Pacific. I wouldn't say there was more there, but we do see what we would think is human influence on our environment, even in the middle of the ocean. Well, there's a lot of things that are happening, and I mean, I'm not an expert in climatology, but we see, you know, increase in storms. We see ocean level rising. That's happening. We, you know, on this leg, we saw orcas, like I was saying, at 4 degrees south of the equator, and I'm not an expert in orcas either, but that seems really warm of a place where orcas are. You know, we normally see them in really cold waters. I would say, you know, especially affecting Pacific Ocean people is ocean level rise, and people considering leaving their homelands for other places. Yeah, but wind patterns, I would think that it's the same, that our kupuna even have seen while they're sailing. Similar wind patterns of they saw 40 years ago, but probably just an increase in the strength and the number of storms. Yeah. Yeah, how do we keep electronics dry? It's yeah, it's a tough one. But yeah, we have like I was saying, we have our satellites. They are you know, extra weatherproof, that they just sit out in the salt air, getting splashed by waves at times, so it's salt water and rain, and they just seem like the way those guys are built is they're solid. But our radios, our VHF radios are waterproof, so we just try to get as much waterproof stuff as we can. And the other electronics, like the iPads and the computers, like we were saying, how we upload photos and videos and blogs just about every day. The days that we don't upload those or send those is days of rough weather and or a lot of rain. So yeah, if it's rainy, if it's wet, if it's rough, we just leave them tucked away in their waterproof cases so they don't get wet. Okay. Oh yeah, we see bioluminescence all the time. Yeah, we see a lot in the Pacific, and we saw a lot in the Atlantic as well. And what we see, which is kind of crazy too, is squids. So we go through these big schools of squid that light up as they're just swimming. And so sometimes we see like a little light of, it's like, oh, was that a squid? Was that bioluminescence? Well, I was like, it's probably a squid. And then, I think I saw one over there. I saw some last night. But this one time, we went through this huge school of squid, like everywhere, as far as you can see. It was like, I don't know who this was, but they compared it to the Bellagio water show. But just because there was so much jumping out of the water and just lighting up everywhere as far as we could see. So, yeah, we see some crazy stuff out there. Yeah.
As a navigator, how did you avoid the major storms that the giant Princess Cruise might?
Oh, yeah. Well, cruise ships, they have a lot of high-paying customers and ports of dates that they have to get there. We're at an advantage that we don't. We don't need to leave on a specific date. We don't need to be anywhere at any time, really. We go when the weather tells us we can go. So if the weather and all the forecasts say it's not good, even if sometimes if there's a chance that it's not going to be good, we won't go. The people like the cruise ships, they just, they go through hurricanes. There's hurricanes coming, they still leave port, and they just think, if the hurricane comes, because we can go so fast, we'll just outrun them. We can't do that on Hōkūleʻa. We average maybe 5 miles an hour. So it's all based off of weather predictions. And with the technology we have to send out blogs and stuff, photos, we also can get emails in. So not only do we get emails from classes asking questions of, how to use a bathroom or whatever they may be, we can get weather forecasts updates if there's a severe storm coming our way. And if there's any chance of something happening, then, safety is our number one thing. We avoid, and avoid. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for coming. Mahalo.